Hello and welcome to Music Group University. Today's topic will be the X32's version 2.0 firmware. My name is John DiNicola, Manager of Channel Marketing for the Prosumer Division here at Music Group. I'm also joined today by Evan Hooten, who is a specialist in channel marketing for the Prosumer Division in Music Group as well. In this presentation, we will cover a number of the exciting new features available in version 2.0, including the 100 band RTA, new scene management, gain split and new routing options, acoustic integration with TurboSound IQ speakers, new physically modeled effects, the artist presets collection, and an overview of additional features. Now I'm going to hand it over to Evan Hooten, who's going to start off by talking about the new 100 band RTA.
Thanks very much, John. Again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this version 2 webinar. We're so excited about all these new features, so let's just go ahead and get started. So the first new feature that we're going to talk about is our new RTA feature in version 2 software. It has a new screen just for it in the meter section, so it's your fifth tab on the meter section, and it displays in both an RTA real-time analyzer, a 100 band real-time analyzer, or a spectrograph, which fits within a 10-second window. So not only do you have a whole separate screen for this new feature, but you can also assign it and have it fixed laid over on a channel, selected channel, or your graphic EQ as well. And right here you can see a view of the RTA being laid over a channel strip EQ, which can be set for pre or post EQ so that you can actually see the changes that are being made. And as I had mentioned before, the EQ can also be laid over your graphic EQ and set for pre or post so that you can see the changes that are being made in your 31 band graphic within the effects rack. Now on this last slide, for our new RTA function, you can see that we have the spectrograph or the waterfall graph view. And this can be changed between the 100 band RTA bar graph and the spectrograph by pushing in the second rotary knob right where you see bar or spec. So it'll swap between those two for you. But right now, let's take the time to actually go through the additional options that you have for the new RTA function. We'll start in the left where we have our channel EQ defaults. So by default, if you hit the pre-EQ, that means that the RTA or spectrograph will be inserted pre-EQ, so it won't really show all of the changes that you're making in your EQ section. It'll just constantly monitor the line signal coming in. And then you also have, if you want it to be a bar graph or the spectrograph, so that's that little spectrograph section there. Then when we get to our graphic EQ defaults, the first one that says use the RTA source, that is based off of that very last section that you see to the right where it says selected channel, and then right below that monitor, you can select monitor any of your input channels, your mix buses. A way that you would use this would be if you have an RTA microphone, let's say plugged into channel 31 of your console, and you want that to constantly reference what's coming out of your main speakers. So you are going to then lay your overall audio source, which is going to be your overall mix, have that lay over your graphic EQ, which could help out quite a bit if you're trying to search out feedback throughout the show or within your monitors. And then you've got the post-graphic EQ section. You've got defaulted if you want it to show up as the spectrograph. And then again, the RTA source option, the solo priority, means that when you go ahead and you hit the select button on each individual channel, the RTA now follows that, and that is your RTA source. Now we're going to move to our new scene management features, where we're going to cover the cues, our scenes, and the new snippet functions. Now the new cue section is great. This is your new default home tab for when you press the view button in the scenes area instead of it being the actual scenes. So the cue list, what it allows you to do is create a custom show using both your scenes and your snippets, which we are are going to talk about here shortly. But within these queues, you now have the queue list possibilities of 500 queue entries with the additional editing operations, such as your snippets. Every queue can load any one of the 100 internal scenes that are on the console, or any of the 100 snippets that we've put together. And then by separating the queues from the actual scenes in the snippet memory, you now have complete customization of what you want your show to look like. And when using that Go button, you have this complete agility and this automation of just making it seamless from either scene to scene of maybe a theatrical performance or from band to band. Now, in general, everything that the scenes save, being the overall snapshot of the current state of the console, is exactly the same. But something we have added is the new Scene 0. The Scene 0 allows you to create a default customizable state where you want to initialize the console. So instead of reinitializing the console and having it zero out everything, you could, if you wish, pull up your new Scene 0 to be your standard way of a starting point for a show. Now, this new snippets feature is really fantastic. What it allows you to do is take multiple individual parameters, be it either for your individual input channels, your mix buses, your effects, and actually store those in a snapshot, the current state of all those parameters which you have selected, as you can see by that very extensive menu that you have. So what you can do now is actually save groups of those, and instead of having to recall an entire scene of a console for one particular section of channels or a layout of your console, now you can just recall these in groups. So then it actually picks this group, such as here, all of the EQ for my channel 1 through 8 for my drum EQ, and then places it on channels 1 through 8 without changing the rest of the console. And again, once you've done that, these snippets can also, as we talked about, be set up in your queue list as well. So you can have your scenes and then make subsets of those scenes, recalling just individual snippets until you get to a situation maybe with a band where everything is different instead of just the drums. A little more information on our snippets. You have the ability to save 100 of these snippets. Can be stored internally on the console, just like with your scenes, or you can actually export them to a USB drive and save them off of the console for backups or just that extra storage. And then you can also import them as well. So let's say if you're going between two X32 consoles that have the 2.0 firmware loaded on them, you can save these and transport them just like individual scenes. And then also every one of the snippets, they can be loaded separately from the scenes or together with a scene recall. As we talked about, when you get to your snippets, you can just load that particular preset like you would have seen. So the last feature that I'm going to talk about before I hand the presentation over to John is our new gain splitting and remote preamp control. So this new feature can be found on the preamps tab over on the right hand side under the global options, and you've got that HA gain split. So once you click that, what that does is that separates your control of the individual channel gain or the trim pot from the actual channel preamp or the source preamp for that. So when active, the head amp gains can only be adjusted in the setup or preamps page. So if I'm wanting to, again, control my actual preamps either on from a remote stage box or within the X32 itself, I now have to go to the preamps tab and select that on either the local option or the AS50 options, either the A port or the B port. And so when this feature is engaged, both the front of house and the monitoring consoles, they will now have their separate local gain trims from each other. But however, those gain trims will be set off of the preamp level that you have set here on the preamps tab. But this new head amp gain remote option allows the console gains to be remote controlled by another console as well. And you've got that head amp remote section there at the bottom. So let's say if I'm at front of house and we are actually using the monitor console as our split, because I'm doing my feed off of that. So I can actually then, from my front of house console, remote in and through the AS50 A port or B port, however I'm connected, actually control those particular gains. So if we're using the monitor console as our split, and then remote into those local preamp blocks on the monitor console and adjust that. Or I can select my AS50A ports if I have the S16 connected and control the preamps on the S16. So this is a wonderful feature, and we're very excited that we can now offer this within the X32.
We also find some new routing and patching flexibility in version 2. The output matrix now treats output signals and physical XLR outputs separately, allowing you to patch signals from the AES50 or expansion card slot directly to XLR outputs. This is extremely handy, for example, when using an X32 rack in place of an S16 stage box, allowing you to take outputs from the front of house console and route them directly to the outputs on the X32 rack without needing to bring those signals into the rack as inputs. You will also find new options when assigning signals to individual outputs, including the ability to tap your signal pre or post mute. So when you're assigning signals on the out 1 to 16 tab, for example, you'll notice that each tap point now has a plus M option. So when you are using the plus M option, the mute would affect your tap. So this is a new level of flexibility that we did not have before. And finally, we've also added additional pre-gate taps for the bus sends. So when you see in/LC, that's standing for input/low cut, and the signal is tapped right after that. So this is a pretty big deal. We now have the ability to send signal to monitors mixes, for example, pre-gate. Another exciting feature of version 2 is acoustic integration with the TurboSound IQ speakers. This is going to allow you to use the Ultranet port on the X32 to digitally connect to IQ speakers and send audio using the P16 out page of the routing menu. Because of the link port on the IQ speakers, you can connect multiple speakers together in a system and only have one cable running to the front of house console. Aside from transporting digital audio, you can also use this menu to trigger presets within the IQ speakers directly from the console. The IQ speakers will feature presets emulating classic PA cabinets, as well as custom presets that you can set yourself, and you can trigger these all from the console using this menu shown here. Probably the most fun part of the version 2 update are the new effects plugins and features. Before taking a look at the plugins, I'd like to highlight that the dedicated effects return channels now feature the same 4-band parametric EQ that is on the aux return and input channels. So there's no longer any need to move those effects returns over if you need that 4-band parametric EQ. In addition, in the assign section, we've also added the ability to assign a specific layer of the effects section to an assign button. So if you need to pull up the B side of a graphic EQ, you can now do so at the touch of a button. The 15 new effects plugins were painstakingly physically modeled from classic processors of the past, many of which would cost thousands of dollars if purchased on their own, all included for free in this update. Here is a look at the plugins that are new for version 2.0. Now let's talk for a minute about our Artist Presets collection. When you open the preset library in version 2, you will find a lot of new presets for channel strip and effect settings. That's because we've reached out to our X32 users using the console professionally out in the field, and we've asked them to provide some starting points for you to use. We've reached out to some such as the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles. They're actually using 2 X32s at the front of house and monitor position. Also Earth, Wind & Fire and Living Color, who have been touring with X32 systems. Also Peter Mache, who's known for his work with Daryl Hall and John Oates. And of course, Big Blue Meanie Recording Studios in New York City has gave us some presets from the studio perspective. A small but very useful feature for X32 compact and producer users, you now have the ability to spill your inputs across both the 8 input and 8 group and output faders on the console surface. So by pressing two layer buttons at once on the left-hand side of the console, you can spill those two layers across the 16 faders. So for example, if I press 1 through 8 and 9 through 16 at the same time, inputs 1 through 8 would appear on the 8 input faders, and 9 through 16 would appear on the output faders. And what's really cool about this is that you can use any two combinations. So for example, you can look at inputs 1 through 8 on one side and your effects returns on the other side. It's any two buttons you press at once. We've also added a lot of MIDI functionality to version 2.0, including the ability to control the volume, pans, and mutes for all input and output channels via MIDI. We've also added MIDI functionality to support the new scene management system, so you can now also trigger scenes, snippets, and cues via MIDI as well. You can set this up in the Remote tab of the Setup menu. We have also added support for our 3 new expansion cards for the X32, the X Dante, the X Madi, and the X ADAT. You now have more options for color coding your LCD scribble strips, as each color now has an invert option. We have also expanded the console lock. Previously, you could only lock and unlock the console by pressing the home button for about 5 seconds, and then you can press that again to release it. Now you can use any combination of buttons, so whichever buttons you press to lock the console, those will be the buttons that are required to unlock it. The console lock is now also the safe shutdown mode. In addition to the artist presets, we've also added to the library the ability to import and export multiple presets at the same time. This will be very handy, for example, when switching between our preloaded presets and presets that you may have. That is just an overview of the new features of the version 2 firmware for the X32. If you're an X32 user and you haven't already, download this update today for free from www.behringer.com. Thanks for watching.